Greetings YouTube, this is Gauls, and on today's video we will speculate on the nature of Gaulish music, what instruments did they use, and how did it sound like. This is not a simple topic because musical instruments don't survive the passage of time well, and we don't have sheet music or written sources about Gaulish music, but there is one instrument that is attested well enough. Lyres were fairly popular instruments. The Romans used them, the Greeks used them, and even the Germanic tribes by the time of the late Roman Empire. The Gauls had lyres of their own. We think they had 7 to 10 strings. They were played with both hands, doing chords or melodies, or even simple polyphony where one hand would do one melody and the other hand would do another melody or simple accompaniment. We can reconstruct a possible name for this instrument, Krotos, which is related to the Welsh word crwth, a type of bald lyre, and both mean round thing. The picture that I have used here comes from a luthier by the name of Benjamin Samoni. He specializes in ancient instruments, and I suggest that you check out his website that I put in the description below. Now we can look at the different attestations that we have for the Gaulish lyre. The main one comes from a statue that was found in Brittany. We can see the picture in the middle. It is maybe hard to make out, but the lyre has 7 strings on this statue, and there is an interesting bar that traverses the top of the lyre just below the bridge. The other attestations that we have are from quaints, and Celtic quaints are fairly abstract, so it can be hard to identify what we see. But here on the picture on the left, beneath the horse, we see a round shape with 4 lines going out and with round shapes on top of these lines. This is a lyre, and we see a similar shape on the right on the picture on the top, and on the picture on the bottom right we see a lyre beneath a horse. Now let's look at the most well-known Gaulish instrument, the Carnyx. The Carnyx is the only instrument that is attested by all sources, whether they are written, archaeological, or artistic. The Carnyx will be considered today as a brass instrument, a natural horn more precisely, because only the lips can change the sound. There are no keys or no holes that the fingers can press down to change the note. This gives the Carnyx a limited range, so its musical use was probably limited to warfare, ceremonies, or solo performances. There is a possibility that the playing style used circular breathing. This is a technique where the air is stored in the mouth, in the cheeks, and there is a constant flow into the instrument of that air. Most people today know this technique from didgeridoo players, but it is thought that the Irish Bronze Age horns were played also using this technique from what we can see of the mouthpieces. Maybe the Carnyx, being another Celtic brass instrument, also used this technique, but it is hard to know. Another thing that is very distinctive about the Carnyx is the animal heads that are found on them. The most common animal that we see is the boar, and the boar was surely a very important animal for the Gauls. We see the boar in many pieces of art, and we also know of a deity called Mockus, which means boar or pig. In a previous video I have identified the boar as the animal of Tautatis. My reasoning was that Tautatis, as the god of tribal warfare, presided over the battles, and the warriors brought Carnyx with them to represent their tribe, to represent Tautatis. This is something similar that we see in Roman legions, with the eagle representing Jupiter. The Romans brought their eagles, and the Gauls brought their Carnyx to war. The flute is most likely to have been played by the Gauls. The instrument is almost universal, found all over the world, and the oldest flutes come from the Paleolithic in Europe from around 40,000 years ago. Flutes have different mechanisms possible. They can have a fipple like a recorder. This is a dent near the mouthpiece where the air that is blown into the flute comes out at an angle which produces turbulence and it produces a note. The other mechanism is an end-blown flute, like a pan flute that we see on the right here, or an Egyptian ney that we see on the top left. The angle of the mouth and the flute creates the turbulence that creates the note. The last type is a side-blown flute, like a concert flute. We see this type in Etruscan art here, on the bottom picture here. Pan flutes were well popular amongst Romans and Greeks. In fact, the name pan flute comes from the Greek character of pan, that we see here, depicted on the right, using a pan flute. Since flutes are fairly simple instruments, and they are found all over the world, and since the Romans and the Greeks used them, there are enough reasons to think the Gauls used them as well. Drums are another kind of topic. We have no attestations for Gaulish drums, but frame drums are almost universal, and they have a very simple construction. We see frame drums as shamanic drums in many different cultures, from Siberian tribes to the Sami and the natives of North America. The Romans also had a type of frame drum called the tympano. The pictures at the bottom show two different ways to play the tympano. The picture on the left shows it could be played with the hands, and the picture on the right shows a statue where the musician is holding some type of stick. This is similar to the Irish boran, which is played with a tipper, a beater. There are different ways to interpret this for the Gauls. We could say that the Irish boran comes from a long tradition that started maybe with the Gauls of using a frame drum with this type of beater. Or we could say that the Gauls were inspired by the Romans and they adopted the timpano or something similar. Or we could also say that frame drums are universal, so there is a lot of reason to think the Gauls had their own type of frame drum. Let's talk about lute-like instruments, like the guitar or the mandolin. They are lute-like instruments. Well, we have no attestations for the Gauls, but we know they were popular with the Romans. This type of instrument comes from Mesopotamia, from the Bronze Age actually. It was fretless. It was played either with a plectrum or with the fingers. It is very likely the strings were tuned in fifths, something like D, A, D. This allows for a playing style where the melody is played on the highest string, while hitting the other strings at the same time, creating a drone. This playing is very similar to how the Persian tanbur is played, and the instrument is probably the ancestor, or shares an ancestor, with the Turkish saz, the Balkan varlama, and the Greek and Irish bouzoukies. The picture on the bottom right is of a Persian tanbur, while the other pictures are from different historical art from the Greek and Roman worlds. It is interesting to note the pandura was not played like a guitar while standing up. The instrument lies in the elbow and the elbow is pointing downwards. This is very similar to what we see the citole being played in the Middle Ages, but not similar to how we play the guitar today. Now let's talk about reed instruments. Well, we don't have any attestations for reed instruments for the Gauls, and we don't even have any attested bagpipes. Actually, the bagpipes might have been a Roman invention. The first historical mention we have of the bagpipes is from a Roman source. It's talking about how this reed instrument was played using the elbow. Today, it seems a lot of people think the bagpipes are a uniquely Celtic instrument, or at least Scottish or Irish. Well, bagpipes are found all across Europe, and I think the explanation for this is the bagpipes were invented by Romans and then spread all across Europe because of Roman influence. But we do have different possibilities for reed instruments for the Gauls. It could have been similar to the Greco-Roman Aulos, which is a double reed instrument that we can see on the pictures at the top here. There's two tubes like two flutes, each with a double reed, and they have a sound very similar to bagpipes actually. The other possibility would have been reed instruments similar to the hornpipe. The hornpipe is an instrument that is found all across Europe. It is a single reed instrument. A single reed means the reed is only one flap of plant matter that vibrates, while a double reed has two flaps of plant matter that vibrates against each other, creating the sound. The hornpipe is a more simple instrument, And we find it today in Wales as the Pibgorn, and we find it also in Eastern Europe. The picture on the bottom right is of a model found in Eastern Europe, while the picture on the bottom left is of 3 Pibgorns, the Welsh kind. Some people claim this instrument dates from the Bronze Age, and it is actually a very simple construction. It is possible, but we don't have any attestations for this. Similarly, in ancient times, in Europe, we don't find any bowed instrument. We have no attestations. Even though the fiddle is so dominant in Celtic music today, in the Gaulish music, they would have had nothing like that. And the fiddle, because it's so dominant, it influences the music, it changes what the melodies are going to be like. So the melodies of Gaulish music would have been totally different from Celtic music today, where notes are played very quickly with big steps between them, because this is easy to do on a fiddle but very hard to do on a lyre, for example. If we go back to the topic of percussions, we find more creative space, because percussions are not just drums. Many things could have been used as percussion instruments. For example, wooden sticks, wooden blocks, seashells, bells of various sorts. This is where we can really get crazy about Gaulish music. If the object could have been easily made by Gauls, and if it sounds nice as a percussion instrument, well, probably it is fine to use. Now for a recap, Gaulish lyres are a sure thing. Carnyx are also a sure thing, but rather limited in their use. Flutes would have been possible. We don't have any straight evidence from Gaul, but the Romans had them, and flutes are almost universal. Frame drums are very likely for similar reasons, and the Gauls would have used various objects for percussions, and it is also possible that the Gauls would have imported or adopted Greco-Roman instruments. A rich Gaul could have simply imported a Roman instrument, while somebody who traveled to Rome would have been inspired by these instruments and would have adopted them into Gaulish culture in some way. The lute-like pandura could have been imported into Gaulish culture, as well as the Aulos, which means these instruments could have been used for Gaulish music, at least in certain contexts where personal wealth and a proximity to Rome or Greece would have permitted it. Let's talk about music theory. Well, I'll keep it simple. Let's just say music theory back then was very different from our own. They had no notion of chords like we have today. They didn't know about chord function, which means Gaulish music will be classified as modal music today. They had no notion of equal temperament, meaning the space between notes would have been different. Equal temperament is the idea that the space between notes is always the same. This is what most music today uses. So the difference between A and A sharp and D sharp is the same, it's a semitone. But for the Gauls, for the Romans, for the Greeks, and for many other traditional types of music, the differences between the notes are different, between semitones can be different depending on the key, on the mode. If you're unsure what this means, I'd recommend you listen to reconstructed Greek and Roman music. I have put links in the description below. It can help paint a picture of the musical theory of the time. It will sound very alien to your ears. I have said it earlier, but I want it to be clear. It wouldn't have sounded like the Celtic music of today. Not at all, for all the reasons that I've explained. Now that you at least know what Gaulish music couldn't have sounded like, you can listen to my intro music. I have put the full song in the description below, and you can listen to it and tell me what I did wrong, what is not accurate in that music. Thank you so much for watching. This video is my longest so far, and the topic is probably one of the most complicated I have done. But I hope you understood things, I hope I explained everything clearly, and don't forget to check out the videos in the description. It will help you paint a picture of how these instruments could have sounded like and how the music would have been like. Thank you so much, my name is Gaulos, and see you next time.